The U.S. Treasury Secretary just confessed something on live television that most people completely missed. Not a slip, not a rumor, a deliberate, public announcement about the future of your money. And if you don't understand what he said, you will feel it in your savings, in your retirement, in your grocery bill. What he said in 4 words is the most consequential thing any American official has said about money in 50 years. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you will understand something that most people around you never will. Here are those 4 words. Bretton Woods realignment moment. That phrase, spoken by Scott Bessent, the man legally responsible for the US dollar, contains a blueprint for what is about to happen to every dollar you own. But to understand why it matters, you need to understand what happened the last time those words were relevant. Because the last time the rules of money changed like this, one group of people became generationally wealthy. Another group watched their savings quietly disappear and never understood why. I'm going to show you both sides of that story, and then I'll tell you exactly where we are today. If this is the kind of content you want more of, the stuff they don't teach in school, hit subscribe right now. New breakdowns every week. July 1944. World War II is not yet over, but its outcome is becoming clear. Representatives of 44 nations gather in a small town in New Hampshire, Bretton Woods, to answer one of the most consequential questions in modern history. What should money be anchored to after the war? Their answer was elegant. The US dollar would be the world's reserve currency. Every other currency would be pegged to the dollar, and the dollar itself would be convertible to gold at a fixed rate of $35 per ounce. The United States held the majority of the world's gold after the war. That made the dollar as trustworthy as the metal in the vault. The supply of dollars was physically constrained by the supply of gold America held. You couldn't just print more. The system had a natural ceiling. Inflation stayed low. Trade stabilized. The American middle class was built during this era. The 1950s and early 1960s represent the highest point of broad-based prosperity in American history, and the Bretton Woods monetary system was the foundation underneath all of it. Then the United States broke the one rule the whole system depended on. The Vietnam War was expensive. The Great Society social programs were expensive. The government needed more dollars than its gold supply could honestly support. It was issuing receipts it didn't have the assets to back. Other countries noticed. France, under Charles de Gaulle, one of the few heads of state who actually understood monetary systems, demanded physical gold in exchange for French dollar holdings. That was their legal right under the Bretton Woods Agreement. Other nations started lining up. The gold was flowing out of Fort Knox faster than anyone could stop it. On August 15, 1971, President Nixon appeared on national television, interrupting a popular Western program, and made an announcement that changed the world. The dollar's convertibility to gold was suspended. Temporarily, he said. That temporary suspension has now lasted 54 years. The dollar became a fiat currency, backed not by gold, but by trust. Trust in American institutions, trust in American markets, trust in America's willingness to manage the currency responsibly. And for decades, most of the world extended that trust. But now, for the first time in half a century, an American Treasury Secretary is saying publicly that the system needs to be rebuilt. The question is, rebuilt into what? If you're finding this valuable, subscribe so you never miss a breakdown like this one. This is the context the financial news cycle never gives you. Here's what almost nobody is talking about. This restructuring is not accidental. It is not being forced on the United States from the outside. It is deliberate policy, designed, announced, and currently being executed by the people who run the U.S. economy. There are 3 specific moves happening right now that together form a coherent strategy. And when you see all 3 together, the direction becomes unmistakable. I'll tell you all 3. But first, I need you to understand the scale of what's at stake for your personal finances, because this is where most commentary completely loses the thread. Here is a sentence that should stop you cold. A Treasury Secretary publicly targeting a 20 to 40% depreciation of the dollar is publicly announcing a 20 to 40% reduction in the real value of every dollar-denominated account in existence. Your savings account balance will not change. The number will look the same, but what that number can buy, in the global economy, in imported goods, in real terms, will be worth significantly less. This is not a prediction. It is the mechanism of deliberate currency depreciation. and it has precedent. The dollar has already lost over 90% of its purchasing power since Nixon closed the gold window in 1971. Not in a crash, not in a crisis. Gradually, silently, continuously. The person who saved dutifully throughout the 1970s and 1980s, keeping money in a bank account, earning nominal interest, didn't feel poor on any given Tuesday. They felt poor when they retired, when they tried to buy a house, when what they expected their savings to be worth turned out to be a fiction. The current policy environment is explicitly designed to accelerate that same process. The only difference is that this time, unusually, remarkably, the people running the system are saying so out loud. So what are the three moves? Because once you see them together, you can't unsee them. The first move is a deliberate weakening of the dollar. Inside the administration, this is being called the Mar-a-Lago Accord, a deliberate echo of the 1985 Plaza Accord, when major nations coordinated a dollar depreciation to correct an overvaluation that was destroying American manufacturing. The current dollar, by the administration's own analysis, is similarly overvalued, strong enough to make American manufactured goods uncompetitive, strong enough to sustain the trade deficits the administration views as evidence of a broken system. The target depreciation being discussed, 20 to 40%, would be the largest deliberate adjustment of the dollar's value in 40 years. The second move is financial deregulation, the unwinding of the regulatory architecture built after 2008. The stated reason, excessive regulation has constrained bank lending and blocked the integration of digital assets into the mainstream financial system. The real consequence, deregulation increases the system's capacity for credit creation, which is inflationary. The 2008 crisis was caused precisely by the kind of leverage and risk-taking the post-crisis framework was designed to prevent. Removing that framework doesn't eliminate the risk. It redistributes it, from bank balance sheets to the broader economy, to savers, to taxpayers. The third move is tariff-driven reshoring of manufacturing. The logic is that decades of globalization have hollowed out American industrial capacity, created dangerous supply chain dependencies, and exported the employment base of the working and middle class. Tariffs raise the cost of imports, making domestic production relatively more competitive. The costs are front-loaded, consumers pay more immediately. The benefits are back-loaded. Industrial capacity rebuilds over years, possibly decades if the policy holds. Three moves. One coherent architecture. Dollar depreciation plus financial deregulation plus manufacturing reshoring equals the most ambitious restructuring of the American economy's global position since Bretton Woods. Whether it succeeds is genuinely uncertain. That it is being attempted, deliberately, by the people with the authority to attempt it, that is not uncertain at all. If you want a channel that actually explains the forces shaping your financial future, not just the headlines, subscribe now. It takes 2 seconds, and it changes what you know. Here's the part that tells you how serious this realignment actually is. Not what the US government is saying. What every other government in the world is doing in response. The dollar's share of global central bank reserves has fallen from 71% in 2001 to under 58% today. Gradual, consistent, structural. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and a growing membership, are actively building alternative payment systems to reduce dependence on dollar settlement. China's CIPS system is a functioning alternative to SWIFT for transactions that don't involve the dollar. And central banks globally, Poland, China, India, Brazil, Kazakhstan, Turkey, are buying gold at a pace not seen in modern history. Over 1,000 tons purchased last year. Record levels sustained over multiple consecutive years. These are not fringe actors. These are the people who understand better than anyone how currencies are created and what determines their long-term value. They are arriving, across wildly different political and economic systems, at the same conclusion, that the asset they've held for decades as the foundation of their sovereign reserves is becoming less reliable, and they are moving, quietly, consistently, before it becomes obvious. When the people who run national monetary systems are all independently making the same move, that is not coincidence. That is a signal. Let me be direct about what happens next. Because there are two scenarios, and most commentary acts as if only one is possible. The first is a managed transition. The dollar depreciates gradually over years. Manufacturing returns incrementally. Trade deficits narrow. Inflation stays elevated but not catastrophic. Investors who hold a diversified mix, including hard assets that hedge against dollar weakness, navigate the transition with purchasing power largely intact. Those entirely in cash and dollar-denominated savings lose ground steadily, but slowly enough that most never fully understand why. The second is a disorderly transition. Dollar depreciation exceeds what the international system can absorb. Trading partners retaliate against tariffs. Inflation accelerates beyond what the Fed can credibly control without triggering a recession. Financial deregulation produces the excess risk-taking it historically does. Asset prices become volatile. The transition stops feeling like a managed adjustment and starts feeling like a crisis. History is not encouraging about which scenario tends to materialize. The 1971 Nixon shock was not managed. It was a sudden unilateral decision announced during a television broadcast without international consultation that restructured the global monetary system overnight. The consequences: inflation, dollar weakness, gold surging from $35 to over $800 per ounce by 1980, were not managed. They were disorderly. The people who were positioned before it became obvious, experienced a generational wealth creation event. The people who held cash and dollar-denominated savings experienced a generational wealth destruction event. The difference between the two groups was not intelligence. It was understanding. The current realignment is being conducted more deliberately and with more advance warning than 1971. Besant is saying in public what Nixon refused to acknowledge until the moment he had no choice. That transparency is genuinely valuable. It gives anyone paying attention an opportunity to understand the direction of the transition and position accordingly, before the most acute phase arrives. So what does positioning actually look like? First, understand your real dollar exposure, not which country your assets are listed in, but what currencies generate the actual cash flows that determine their value. A US-listed company earning 40% of its revenue in Europe and Asia has very different dollar exposure than its listing suggests. Second, hold a meaningful allocation to assets whose value is determined by physical scarcity rather than monetary policy. Gold, silver, physical real estate, productive land. These asset classes have maintained purchasing power across every episode of deliberate currency depreciation in modern history, because their supply cannot be expanded by government decree. Sovereign wealth funds and long-horizon institutional investors typically target 5 to 15% in hard assets. That range reflects a view that hard assets are insurance, not the primary engine of growth, but the firewall against the specific risk that deliberate dollar depreciation creates. Third, and this is the part most people get wrong, do not wait for certainty before acting. Certainty never arrives before price. The optimal window in any major monetary transition is the period between when the mechanism becomes visible to those who understand it and when it becomes obvious to everyone. In 1971, the people who bought gold at $35 per ounce in the months before Nixon's announcement captured a move to $800 over the subsequent decade. They did not know the exact date. They understood the direction of the structural forces. That distinction, between knowing timing and understanding direction, is the most practically important distinction in navigating what comes next. The rules of money changed in 1944. They changed again in 1971. They are changing now. The Treasury Secretary has said so. The central bank purchasing data confirms it. The dollar's declining reserve share documents it. The transition is already underway. The only variable still within your control is the time between understanding this and acting on it. If this gave you a framework you didn't have before, share it with someone who needs to hear it. These are the conversations that don't happen at the dinner table, but they should. And if you want to keep understanding the forces that are quietly reshaping your financial future, subscribe. Not for hype, not for predictions, for the clearest explanation of what's actually happening and what it means for your money. Every single week. The people who understood 1971 before it was obvious didn't have better luck. They had better information. That's all this is.